Lucy Harbin took an axe, gave her husband 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave his girlfriend 41. This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you.
I'm Matt,
I'm Mel.
And I'm Lisa.
and this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. Join us as we continue our new series where we get up close and personal with the psycho biddy herself. We're talking Hagsploitation.
We are talking Hagsploitation. Yeah, this is our third episode in this series, and we decided that we were going to discuss the 1964 film Strait Jacket. Now, this film, if you haven't seen it, is wild. um, that's the only way I really can think to describe it. It's super fun, it's super over the top, very melodramatic. But it was directed and produced by William Castle. We have discussed Castle in some of his other films and his career in previous episodes. I think especially we did a couple of Patreon only episodes that were devoted to Castle and his work, and potentially Tingler, if I remember right. It was a few years ago. But it was written by Robert Bloch, who is probably most famous for writing Psycho. This was the first time he worked with Castle, but it was not the last. This film stars Joan Crawford, one of the most, I think, iconic psycho biddies in this in this subgenre. So a little bit about the film. It got absolute terrible reviews. The critics, the magazines, the newspapers of the time just absolutely dragged this through the mud. But it was a box office hit. So it made a lot of money and audiences loved it. That was in part due to the fact that Castle basically did what he does, which he employed his usual gimmicks to get people to the theater and see his films. It wasn't quite as big of a gimmick as something with like Tingler, where he actually put something in the seats that would I guess tingle, for lack of a better word, kind of give you a shock when you're watching it. um in this one, he had cardboard axes that were painted to look like they were dripping red with blood, and everybody in the audience got them. But to kind of add to that, Joan Crawford was really big on promoting this film. She apparently, from what I've read about the making of this film, she was very involved in the marketing of it. So she would go to a lot of these theaters with Castle and meet the fans and talk about the film. And so she was one of the big draws that got audiences to actually see this film. And I can understand why, because honestly, I think if Crawford was not in this film, we would not be talking about it today. It's like a fun, like I said, it's over the top. It's melodramatic. Um it knows what it is, I would say. But I think if it had anybody else besides Joan Crawford playing the lead, I just don't think we would be talking about it, because she really lent a lot to this film. But I'm going to give you a little overview before I turn it over to Matt and Mel. This film is about Lucy Harbin. Lucy is played by Joan Crawford. And in the opening scenes, we learn that she was a woman who grew up on a farm and was a little unhappy with farm life, but then she marries her husband, Frank, and she is happy because she kind of finally has it all. She has everything that she wanted in life. She has a little daughter named Carol, and her and Frank live in this quaint little house, and she's very happy. It does mention that she's, I think, 7 or 8 years older than Frank. They make a point of that in the film to talk about how she's married a younger man. And I guess that contributed to him going out and meeting his old girlfriends at the bar and then bringing them home when he thought nobody else would find out. So Lucy was away. It's a little vague why she was away, I think. As Mel pointed out when we were talking about this before we hit record, she doesn't have like luggage or anything when she comes back from the train station, but she had been away. And Carol was supposed to be asleep. And she comes home and finds Frank entangled with his girlfriend on their bed. And so, in a fit of rage, she takes an axe and goes and kills Frank and the woman he is cheating with. Then the film fast forwards 20 years. She has been, of course, locked up in an asylum for killing her husband and the girlfriend. But she has been deemed okay to let back into society. And so she goes and moves in with her brother and his wife and their daughter, Carol. So her daughter, Carol, who is now a young woman. So this is a little bit confusing because the young girl in the opening does not seem to be 3 years old, but I swear at some point they say she's 3. So if this is 20 years later, she is 23, and she has met a man that she is now engaged to. His name is Michael. He is wealthy. His parents are like rich and well-to-do people in society, and she is just kind of part of the working class. She's living on a farm again with her uncle and aunt, and now her mother has come home, and she is introducing the mother to Michael, her fiance, and then eventually the parents. But things go off the rails very quickly because it seems like Lucy is not quite ready to be reintroduced to society yet, and people start dying. So that is the I guess the overview of Strait Jacket. There's a lot of melodramatic music that's being played in this film that's really wonderful. Like I said, Joan Crawford really gives an over the top performance. She can switch between emotions really quickly on screen, which is kind of fun to watch. And the the sounds, the like sound design in this film, I think is really interesting because we are on a farm for most of it. And so, like, her own screams cut with like the squeals of pigs and chickens and all sorts of things really go together to kind of create this cacophony that I liked. But I'm not going to say anything else about what I think of the film. I do have some thoughts, but I'm really curious. Now, this was my probably second or third time watching this. Um, Mel, you were the one who suggested it to us that we watched Straight Jacket. I had forgotten I had seen it before until I started watching it. I was like, oh yeah, I know this one. But why don't y'all step in and give your first thoughts before we dive into this movie?
Well, sure, I'll jump in first, I guess. This was my first time watching this movie. It was one that I was aware of and had kind of been on my radar, I guess, but I'd never actually taken the time to watch it. And first impression after finishing it, I enjoyed it. It I will probably have a lot to say throughout the episode about the melodrama because it is ratcheted up to like 10 with the melodrama, but it was an enjoyable movie, and Joan Crawford in particular just did a fantastic job. I know we just talked about her and Betty Davis in our last episode, and once again in this movie, just as great. Great performance, and um, just really fun to watch. It's not to say the movie isn't without flaws, but overall, I enjoyed it. I could see myself watching this again at some point.
Yeah, I enjoyed it as well. I think it could make a good kind of classic horror film to watch at fall or Halloween time. But yes, Lisa, as you mentioned, I may not have watched Whatever Happened to Baby Jane before. I watched it to talk about it with Matt, but I had watched Straight Jacket before at least once. I'm pretty sure that I watched it. I think I watched it when we were talking about William Castle for the podcast, but I might be wrong about that. But it's been several years since I've seen it. So when I was watching it this time, I had kind of a gist of what was going on. I remembered there was, which I'm sure we'll spoil this as we go in our discussion, but I remembered that there was something going on with the daughter, Carol, because just like we talked about with whatever happened to Baby Jane and with other examples of this theme, if you set up someone to be a murderer at the beginning, there's got to be some sort of twisty part. Not saying that she didn't hack up her husband and his girlfriend, she did, but things kind of go haywire, I guess, after she returns, if it wasn't already. I think wild is a perfect way to describe this movie. So for me, I was watching it again and I knew to watch out for the daughter, but there were a few parts that I'd kind of forgotten. I'd forgotten about the surrealist kind of paintings at the beginning, with like screaming faces and body parts everywhere, for the credits. And I had forgotten about a couple of the really like emotional kind of scenes at the end. So watching it again was really interesting. And I, like I said earlier, I enjoyed it. I liked the ratcheting up of the tension. I'm sure we'll talk about the little things that happen in the movie because besides being this kind of uh, echo, I guess, of Psycho, which I'm sure we'll talk about, and focusing on Joan Crawford and the things that it does with makeup and dress and age and representation, which is also just important in the movie itself. Um, it's also a mystery. And so the way I think, even if it is over the top and melodramatic and campy, the way that there are little clues throughout the movie that kind of lead you to constantly be questioning Joan Crawford's character when really you should be looking elsewhere, I thought was really interesting. Of course, it does lead to a lot of kind of, histrionics, and poor decisions. Almost everybody in this movie seems to have an ulterior motive, except maybe Uncle Bill. But and Joan Crawford's character, I guess, to a certain extent, Lucy, toward the end of the movie. Um, but yeah, that ratcheting up of the tension, I think, is really interesting too. And the idea of questioning what's real and what's not. Like, is Crawford's character imagining stuff, or is it really happening? And I love that you plopped this in the notes, Lisa, because one of the things I remembered and was amused to see again was the Pepsi product placement in the movie. Joan Crawford was married to the CEO of Pepsi for like 4 or 5 years. He passed away, and then she was on the board of Pepsi for a while. So there was a period of time in there where she wanted Pepsi on the counters in the kitchens or people drinking it. She brought Pepsi machines with her to set. So the fact that there was a little carton of Pepsi behind them when they'd be having these issues in the kitchen or whatever, and the drama was happening, was also just it just even though it's not a William Castle thing, it's just another little trivia piece of something, about the movie, that I find really fascinating and interesting, especially if you think about like how product placement is such a big thing, now in movies. Which this Pepsi product placement was not the first product placement in movies, but it's one that a lot of people kind of point to or talk about. But yeah, those are some of my impressions.
I feel like they point to it and talk about it because it was huge. Like, it was one of the only things on the counter in that kitchen, and it was a large Pepsi box, which it does make me laugh.
And they just kept walking by it or standing right in front of it to talk with it between them. I mean, it was so obvious they were trying to show it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, watching this film, knowing that we were going to talk about it, I think I kind of watched it with different eyes than I have before because I'm pretty sure the first time I saw it, it must have been like on TV when I was younger. And I just, or my dad watched a lot of old horror and so did my grandmother. So there's a good chance that like I watched it sitting on the floor at my Meemaw's house. Um, so I don't know if I was really like watching it with a critical eye, but when I was watching it this time, I mean, I did notice like the product placement, and it's like you said, it's one of the first. It's not the first film to use product placement, but she was very adamant that it be in the film. I mentioned that she was really involved with the structuring of kind of the film and how it was promoted. One of the things I noticed, and we can talk about it when we get kind of to the end, but she changed essentially the ending of the film, by adding on. She didn't want the ending to be her daughter's face, which was the original ending, was her daughter's face screaming. But at the end, we kind of get her explaining the film to us, in a really weird way, because she wanted that for her character. Like, she wanted her character to have the last word, and I'm sure she wanted to be the last person to be seen, um, and remembered. But it is really interesting when you kind of see those things and it stands out. But speaking of watching this film with a critical eye, I want to float some things by you, um and see if you notice this too. And I've been doing a little bit of research. I'm going to continue to do it after we stop recording, but to find out exactly how this film like inspired others that came later. One of the first things I noticed was, I felt that when you look at especially Pearl, but to some degree X, which we talked a little bit about when we started this Hagsploitation and Psycho Biddy discussion, this kind of series, we did mention those films because it does have an older woman playing the killer. But in those particular films, you do have a farm girl, especially in Pearl, a farm girl with an axe. And it reminded me a lot of this film. There were some scenes, especially with Joan Crawford's character and Leo, the farmhand, in the barn, that really reminded me of Pearl. And I know that, a lot of people have talked about when West was making Pearl and how he drew inspiration um, from The Wizard of Oz. And that is obviously all over that film. But I also think that he must have been watching Strait Jacket. That it just feels like Strait Jacket's DNA is built into Pearl. Um, so I would love to find, so I'm sure there are interviews out there and I just haven't read through all of them yet. I've read a few people who have, when they were reviewing it, kind of draw that conclusion, but I haven't seen anywhere Wes directly was talking about it. So I'd really love to find that. But there was a couple of other scenes that really pointed out to me too. One, the scene about maybe like 2/3 into the film, with that farmhand Leo, and he is, I think it was with Leo, but anyway, he was hanging up the linens, the laundry outside, and you had them floating, and for just a moment you think you see somebody like back there, and he even goes and checks, but there's nothing there. And I thought, that has been used a lot in horror. If you see laundry hanging on a line, there's going to be something scary standing behind it. So, like, the first, I think maybe most famous that everybody thinks of is Halloween. There was one in that 1978 one. And then later, The Conjuring did it really well. That was a really, I thought, effective scare scene. But I don't know. That scene with the laundry hanging up, that had to have been one of the first. And so I wonder how much it inspired the ones that came later. So that stood out to me. And then there was also that bathroom shower scene, where Allison, the Michael's mother, the like future in-law, for Carol, she's looking for her husband Raymond, who's already been killed by this point. And she goes into her bedroom, and at first we think we see his head, but then we realize it's like a bust. Um, and then she goes into the bathroom, and there is this like rounded um shower, and the shower curtain kind of ruffles. And so you think somebody's hiding behind there, and she goes to look, and again, it's another kind of jump scare that is meant to I think increase the tension. You don't see, like, you're expecting her to pull back and see something and nothing's there, and so you kind of take a breath and relax, but then the real jump scare is only like a few paces behind, which this film does really well. But I that really stood out to me for two reasons too. Was the shower scenes. Number one, I thought, okay, that is effective. That's an effective scare. Um, it reminded me, with the again, with just the way it was shaped, that like rounded, it really reminded me of the bathroom ghost scene in The Shining, which made me wonder how, again, how much of that DNA was kind of going in, because this was a big film. Um, but then also, of course, Psycho, if it was like a little nod to Psycho. Which may be my next question to you guys is, and this is something we talked about beforehand. I made the comment that I said I thought, Robert Bloch doesn't, when, at least when it comes to movies, I know he's written a lot. I know he had a huge career, but a lot of his movies, especially in the 60s, his 60s horror movies, are a little bit one note, and they're all, in my thought, Psycho but different. And is this not just kind of Psycho but with girls? Again, I don't want to diminish the film. I love the film. It felt very similar to me, especially with that shower scene.
Oh, I completely agree with you. Which you should know from our conversation before we started recording. But for the record, on the record, I agree that there's a lot of similarity to Psycho with this movie, and I mean, just even structurally, not even like the very blatant scenes that seem similar. Just structurally, it's um, very similar, down to the big reveal, the twist at the end, that sort of thing. And again, it doesn't diminish it, but I will stand by my statement that this does kind of feel like they put a bow on it, and it's now Miss Pac-Man, or I guess Miss Psycho in this instance.
Yes, and I mean, it's not going to surprise you guys that I say I agree with y'all. I also saw the similarities to Psycho, the misdirection, but then kind of to go back to what you had mentioned, Lisa, and build a bit on what Matt was saying, I guess, is, you have the parent child relationship, only this time, like you said, it's a mother and a daughter. And I mean, I think by talking about this, we've already spoiled the fact that, Lucy's done her time, her 20 years in an institution, and she's testing out life again and trying to figure out who she is. And meanwhile, her daughter, the thing that we're being misdirected from, has basically been deeply affected by whatever was going on with her mom, either from witnessing what her mom did, or possibly, we don't know, but she's basically trying to take advantage of her mom's release to, I don't know, get revenge, but also just to make money. Like, she's going to murder her boyfriend's parents and frame her mom. Her mom's like an easy mark to be framed. But that end where you were mentioning earlier, Lisa, at the end of this, her screaming, there's a lot of problematic stuff there, because like, she's having memories of witnessing what her mom did, and then she's screaming, I love you and I hate you, and I hate what you did, and then I'm sorry. And so, yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of similarities, even in the relationship and the motivations, to a certain extent, of the children. Like, we are being led to believe there are certain psychological reasons why this happened, even though, we don't have like real life doctors telling us what's going on. Well, we had a doctor kind of in the movie telling us that in Psycho. um but yeah, I think everything you guys are saying, the structure, the misdirection, and even that just really uncomfortable and disturbing relationship between the parent and the child, with its echoes, but also just the violence of the child. Only this time we have the mother who's there at the end, and we can, like you mentioned, Lisa, redirect to her response to what happens at the end, and she's like, "I'm going to help her." But yeah, There's so many similarities there that I completely agree with you guys. The idea of putting a bow on it and calling it Miss Pac-Man is a good way of putting it, I think.
That being said, I mean, now that we have, kind of spoiled the ending, which I mean, honestly, it's a 1964 film. I don't know if we can really really spoil it too much. I did think it was an effective kind of redirect uh, for what was happening because just of what is shown and what is not shown, like what is kept from us through this. So when we first get Crawford's character coming back home, um, the daughter is obviously very excited, but I did question what was up with her kind of early on. Um, she almost seemed to taunt her mother at times. One case in particular, she had like jangled those bracelets, like the bracelets that her mother had worn, which were, I mentioned like the sound design and the like kind of soundscape of this film, I thought being really exceptional. That was one of the things that you notice as an audience member prior to the murder is Lucy walking up to the house and she's all dolled up and um her charm brace, she's got these really kind of thick big charm bracelets on and you can hear them clinking as she's like walking and moving, and the daughter brings them out of like storage and like shakes them, and the look on Crawford's face when she does that, you can tell that it immediately takes her back but also really disturbs her. And I don't know, the daughter Carol, she almost had this look on her face like she was proud of herself for it, but then she immediately kind of puts them to the side and moves on. And so it was just kind of one of those very quick, brief, where you're like, "Oh, wait, something's not right here." But then she takes her mother out, she takes her shopping, but she like dresses her up like she looked that night. Like she gets a very similar dress and she gets her new shoes, she gets her new like bracelets that are the charm chunky bracelets, and then she has her put on this wig because of course her mother is like, graying and looks older now, but she has her put on this wig um that makes her look younger. And I remember at that point thinking, this is really strange. But then when the daughter said, "You look just like I remembered you did." And I thought, okay, this this kind of makes sense to me while maybe the daughter is acting weird. Like perhaps she is, because she's trying to like reconcile with who her mother was. And I think we ought to point out that she didn't go see her for those like 20 years. She was just away. They were just apart from each other. Um so I did think that that was really interesting, and I thought, "Okay, that kind of makes sense." Like, she's just trying to connect with her mother in the only really way she knows how to. Like, this is the mother she's always had in her mind. Therefore, she's trying to, like, return to that. I don't know, it felt like a very psychiatric kind of way of looking at it, like, maybe very Freudian of, like, she's trying to return back to this idea, of who she had. And then you start seeing the mother acting more and more, I would say, unhinged as the thing goes on. And so it kind of redirects you from anything you might have thought the daughter was doing. Especially that first scene when we see her like all dressed up and back at the house and she meets Michael and she immediately starts flirting with him in a very uncomfortable way. We also see her interact with Leo in the barn and he hands her an axe. I have no idea why he would hand her an axe. Um, but he does, and you kind of see her reaction to that. You also see her reaction to the knife earlier. Um, where she's clearly not ready to really be back in society yet, or it's very, at the very least, it's very jarring for her. So I think there was enough of that to make us think, "Oh, okay, she's just not ready to be back." But then there was one little thing that kind of bothered me too as I was watching the film, that made me go back to the daughter, that there was something not right with her, or there was something just not sitting right. And that was that nursery rhyme that Mel read early, when in our intro, Lucy Harbin took an axe and gave her husband 40 whacks. Of course, that's a play on like Lizzie Borden. It struck me as like very Shirley Jackson, hearing the like neighbor kids taunting with the nursery rhyme. The reason it stood out to me is she hears it and she hears the kids say her name, but then later, when the future potential in-laws, Michael's parents, are talking about her, and they mention that the daughter is very strange and won't really say why her mother was away for 20 years. I think she says she was like at a, had some sort of illness or something, is the way she explains it. And I thought, the parents don't know who she is. Like, the parents don't know the name, um, Lucy Harbin. And if the kids knew it well enough to know the story of like a Lizzie Borden type killing, like if she had reached that level of local fame, then his parents should know who she is, like without having, because the mom even says, like, I'm going to have to do some looking into her to make sure she's okay, for us to like align ourselves with in marriage. And that was the thing that kind of made me think, "Oh wait, we're not getting the whole story here." Um it was really cleverly done. Like, I know this was over the top. I know it was overly dramatic, but I did think that the mystery and kind of the eventual, like when we find out what the daughter was doing, that she was running around and axing people and blaming it on her mother intentionally, and gaslighting her mother at the same time. I thought it was really well done. I really did. Um, that's not to say that it's not Psycho with a bow on top and like just gender swapping it, because it kind of is, but it still was pretty well laid out.
Well, and to add just a little to what you were saying, when it's revealed at the end, in that scene that was added by Joan Crawford, where she literally just kind of explains everything that Carol did. That was actually one of the notes that I had, was like, "Oh, wow, I just love how they lay it all out at the end, in case you couldn't follow it." But to your point, she very specifically like shows how that nursery rhyme that the girls were singing was actually played from a recorder that Carol would have had in her purse. Uh, so those voices that she was hearing when she was inside the shop, was actually not the little girls that she saw when she ran out, that were skipping rope and doing, singing whatever nursery rhyme they were actually singing. So I think that's a great point, and it does, um, like they kind of point you to that at the end, to make that connection without making that connection for you, about how, well, like you said, that obviously they're on the other side of the country from where Lucy was when she killed her husband and his girlfriend. So yeah, I mean, the pieces are there, if you're perceptive enough, and they even kind of explain the recorder thing at the end so you can understand it. But it is nice that they leave that for you to connect, even in a scene while they are laying everything out for you.
Yeah, I agree. And I agree too that while the end, where they explain everything, might be a little bit too much, I kind of went with it because beyond the fact that Joan Crawford probably wanted to be on the screen at the end, it does bring us some closure with her character. Like, her character is the person who was wearing the straitjacket. I mean, she is the person who put all this into motion. She has that really dramatic, with an all cap scene where she's yelling about how she paid her price to society, like she just wants to reintegrate. And so I think maybe by ending with her explaining it, it kind of takes back the story to her side. That we end with the person we kind of began with, and not the observer that was obviously damaged by what she observed. One other thing I was thinking when both of you were talking, but Lisa particularly when you were talking about Carol's apathy or her ambivalence, I guess is a better word. I also, even though I had watched it before, I think I still probably was suspicious of her the first time because they do put attention on some of these moments where Carol almost has no affect almost. And I don't I'm not saying, like, I'm not trying to impugn her as an actor, but it's like at the beginning she seems nervous her mom is coming back, which I'm like, okay, I can understand that. But when her aunt is hugging her, she doesn't really hug her back. She has no facial expression. There are times in the movie where she'll be showing one emotion to the person who's talking to her, and when they hug her or turn, we see for a second something else. And so I don't think you can, on a first viewing, like 100% figure it out. You're always going back and forth between, oh, this Joan Crawford character, Lucy's unreliable. Maybe she was let out of this asylum too soon. Even her doctor comes and checks up on her, which makes her really nervous and kind of sets her back a little bit. And the daughter takes advantage of her confusion. But then you've also got a daughter who is obviously affected by this. And the daughter pushes her so much to try to do more than she wants to or needs to do. I feel like if she had come to her brother's house and didn't have the added stress of meeting Carol again and having to try to negotiate what could have happened to Carol, that she would not have had such a bumpy transition because she wouldn't have tried to dress like before and acted like who she was before for Carol, who was pushing her to do that. She wouldn't have tried to meet people so early. Carol was pushing her to do that. There's a really poignant scene in the movie for being so over the top where Carol is pushing her over and over again to meet Michael on like her first day back or something. And she's or her second day back, right after Carol has shown her the bracelets and the knife and talked about butchering things and the slaughterhouse and all this stuff that's like really weird to be saying to her. She's like, oh, yeah, you're going to meet this new person. And she's like, I can't do that. And she's like, Michael's not a stranger. And Lucy says, everyone's a stranger. Like for this woman, the only people when she comes out of this hospital that she knows are Bill, Emily, and Carol. And she's been gone from them for 20 years. And this thing happened that changed everything. And so, yeah, I just think these little moments where you're like, is Carol doing this because she just wants her mom back and to be her mom? Or is there an ulterior motive here? Because some of the things that Carol is pushing her to do are messing with the acceptance of what Lucy had worked toward. Um, Carol's not letting her be who she is now and moving forward. She's kind of clawing to pull her back. And even the chant and the childlike voice is almost like Carol being stuck as a child or something. While at the same time, uh, being the architect of this grand framing murder mystery. So, yeah, I like what you guys are saying about like for a very melodramatic movie, there's some nuance between the play of the two characters that makes us not trust Lucy sometimes when we looking back we probably should have.
Yeah, I had the same thought early on, and I think that's where I was kind of questioning what was going on with Carol because I thought, is this actress just truly a bad actress? Like her affectation was so off. But then I think looking back on it, it was done intentionally. Um and I thought about that scene too where Lucy says everybody is a stranger because it was very touching and she was very honest with her daughter about not being ready for certain things. She didn't want to meet people. She did, but just not right then. She put up that boundary of saying, I'm not ready, and her daughter was obviously pushing her or when she put on the wig, being like, "Are you sure I don't look too young?" Like, she had no desire to kind of go back into the past in the way that she was kind of being forced to. But she did it for Lucy, which is really interesting because when we did have that, like, tagged on ending scene, one of the last things we get from Lucy is that she just wants to help her daughter. She says, "Oh, well, she's where I was now." Like, we'd kind of swap places, and I couldn't be there for her 20 years ago, but I can be there for her now. And so because she's kind of doing that. So I did think that that was really interesting. And like you said, it was kind of poignant for it being such a melodramatic movie. But that part of the reason she could be manipulated by her daughter is that she wanted a relationship with her daughter. Like, she didn't wanna look 20 years younger, but if that's what her daughter wanted her to do, then she was gonna do that. She didn't wanna meet people, but if her daughter wanted her to do that, she was gonna do that. So she was, like, overstepping all these things that she knew were gonna be bad for her and her mental health because she knew that that's what her daughter wanted. So I did think, I don't know. It went deeper than it really should have. But I do wanna talk about the daughter a little bit since we're kind of talking. I mean, I know, like, Crawford obviously is the star of this, and I still stand by the fact that, like, if this had been anybody else in this role, I don't know if we'd be talking about this movie today. Um, but I did find it interesting, like, Carol's motivations when we learn who she is. Like, and again, the clues are all there. You just, you have to know how to follow them. But we know she's an artist. We know she's very talented with, like, sculpture and stuff, and obviously, like, makeup. And so she was the one who was able to, like, make a essentially like a mask of her mother. She was able to put on her mother like a costume. Um, and that was her plan all along, was to kill her in-laws and blame her mother, because then she would have the life she thought she deserved. She was like, "No, we'll have the house, we'll have the money, you will have the, like, public standing, and it won't be bad on us because it will just be sad. It will just be sad that, oh, they let out this woman who wasn't ready to be in society yet, and look what happened. Her fragile mental state broke and she killed people, and it's very sad, but now I get everything." Which again kind of leads me back to the Pearl kind of film, and thinking about what Ty West must have been looking at when he was doing that. But, Pearl's line of, or kind of mantra really in that film, of being, "I will not live a life that I do not, or, that I do not deserve. Like, I'm going to get what I want out of life." And that was her goal. Her goal, she was like, "I'm going to leave this farm and I'm going to get, do something. And if I have to kill to do it, I'm going to do that." And that I really thought was interesting when we kind of got that glimpse of Carol and her motivations. Like, yes, she went through a lot of trauma with her mother and not having her mother and father around, and trying to, I'm sure, reckon with what her mother had done. Um, and the ending scene is very emotional. The, like, ending scene we get with Carol, where, she's yelling, and it's over the, like, picture of her mother wrapped in the straitjacket. I like, yes, it is about that mother-daughter relationship, but I really thought it was interesting too that Carol was drawn to be such a social climber, and to have that be the motivation of, "This is the life that I want, this is the life that I deserve, and if something comes up that I and is stopping me from getting it, then I'm going to make sure to take out that roadblock and get what I want." Um, and she even has a scene earlier with her fiance Michael, when he says something about, "Well, is money the only reason? Like, don't you still love me?" That I thought was really interesting. So yeah, there is a lot. This film goes deeper than it really should. But I liked the way Carol was drawn as both the like daughter slash victim, but also the masked killer.
I think it's interesting that you bring up the fact that she wanted the money, and we saw that foreshadowed because two things I was thinking. One is at the beginning of the movie, we're told that Lucy's husband, who, as you mentioned, was younger than her, only married her because she had inherited some property. And then later, there's a really jarring moment when they're on their way to meet Michael's parents, even though Lucy doesn't really want to do this, where Emily basically just says all of a sudden she's really excited about this evening because they're so close to having really rich relatives. And those 2 points, one is Carol's father, and the other is Carol's, aunt by marriage. But I thought it was interesting that we had those bits of foreshadowing too. There's just so many signals to what ultimately is going to happen.
Well, I agree with the both of you, and don't really have anything particular to add to what you all were saying, aside from I agree. But I did want to, before we wrap up the episode, just kind of talk about that reveal with the two Lucys, if you will, when um, when Carol comes out and is wearing the mask that she's made that does make her look very, very much like Lucy, and she's wearing the same dress and the wig and the dangly or dangly bangles, I guess. I don't know what you call them, those really loud bracelets. And there is kind of that brief kind of tussle between the real Lucy and Carol as Lucy, and it is definitely probably one of the more memorable moments of the movie. I mean, obviously, this is the big reveal where we find out that it wasn't Lucy who was committing these crimes. She was a red herring all along, and it's not immediately revealed who it is. I mean, by process of elimination, if you're a smart watcher who's been really paying attention, you can probably go, oh, yeah, that's probably Carol. But it is a pretty convincing Lucy mask, although I would definitely say it falls into this weird, uncanny valley kind of territory for sure, because it is obviously a latex mask. Like, if you look at it closely or with any for longer than a couple of seconds, it really does become apparent that this is, a mask and not the person's real face. But then, I mean, even Lucy, the real Lucy, kind of wrestles with Carol and knocks her onto the bed and pulls the mask off, and then has this big revelation that it's Carol. And it was it was just a really good, well done scene, I thought, in terms of how the reveal happens and how they make use of it. Because, I mean, you can make a very bad latex mask. It's very easy, I think, to do this poorly, and this was something that they definitely got right for the scene. And I guess they sprung for the big bucks for for the mask. And yeah, so I mean, we end up with this kind of, well, I mean, it's kind of been our recurring theme of this kind of psycho-esque movie, where in that one the reveal is that it was Norman dressed as a woman, not his actual mother, who is actually dead. And not to throw shade at Strait Jacket, but that is definitely echoes of Psycho. But I think it does distinguish itself enough from it that it's not a complete cookie cutter. And I think that's kind of been the line that we've been towing throughout this episode, is that for all the comparisons to Psycho, and there are many thematic and otherwise similarities to Block's previous Psycho, it does still stand fairly well on its own as a film. And I mean, it obviously owes a debt to Psycho and is is playing with it, but that doesn't make this a bad movie. It's definitely fun to watch, and watching Joan Crawford in particular just vacillate between sanity and insanity at times. It's all really great. So I guess that's kind of probably a good place for us to wind down the episode there. So listeners, if you have seen Strait Jacket and have any thoughts, we would absolutely love to hear from you about them. We are at No Fearcast on Twitter and Instagram, and we also have a Facebook page. Our email is nofearcast@gmail.com, and if you love what we're doing, please consider supporting us on Patreon. We also have merchandise available at our website, nofearcast.com, or you can simply rate and review us, which is entirely free and helps other listeners find us. The music is by Nicholas Gasparini. We will be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.